Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to season 2 of Conversations in Pop Culture. And before I go any further and introduce my guest, I do want to remind everybody that there are several links up above, including a link to my guest's Kickstarter. So go check that out, back that, as well as buy me a coffee to support this show. You just click on that link, and I'll bring you right in and instruct you how to do it. So without further ado, I have with me comic creator Tom Rasch. So welcome to the show.
Hi, Andrew. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am very excited because obviously people know you from Marvel from back in the day. You have a Kickstarter going on, which is Black Alpha. And so I think that funded in 2 or 3 days pretty quickly. And so before we get into some of the weeds of Black Alpha and break it down, what is the basic premise of this comic? Because I know it's very interesting, it's very exciting, and we're going with a big bang here.
Well, I always drop it in like the elevator pitch style, and I just say it's what if you took the Batman story, you sprinkled in Iron Man tech, and you dropped it off in the middle of Star Wars, basically, because the 11-year-old in me, and I was 11 when I created this character and this story, sort of gets so excited I want to share the minutia, all the details of the universe. So I've really had to kind of work on boiling down the kind of story I want to tell in that kind of a pitch. And there was an article done in USA Today about it some time ago, and that's kind of how I sold it to the audience. I figured that's sort of the best way to get, an idea. And sometimes I think in this modern age, sometimes that can be a little bit overdone, but it's probably the closest I can come to say, if you like Batman, if you like Iron Man, and you like Star Wars, you're probably going to like this thing. So.
Yeah, and to get into a little bit of the story, because basically we have a mining accident. Some guy pretty much survives, Trandon Antares, I want to say, or Antares. I'm not exactly sure how to say his name.
Trandon Antares.
Trandon. That's as close as I'm going to get. It's as close as I'm going to get.
That works for me. Good enough.
And basically his family gets killed, I think, is safe to say. But he sort of finds this Guardian suit that is a mystical power suit that is meant, I guess, to protect, and bad people want it. And now it's the entire story of him wanting to sort of get justice for his family, as well as taking on massive new responsibility. And so that's kind of what I think this story is, sort of where it's going. And obviously it's expanding much further out of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you definitely hit kind of the major, I guess, the bullet points of the overall kind of general beats that I want to tell. And I've said it on a few occasions and in previous interviews that it's a love letter to science fiction and superheroes. The first things I saw on television as a young boy were Batman, Spider-Man, and Star Trek. And I was around 4 or 5, and I was hooked immediately. Never looked back. I think before I even knew what nerd culture was, if that was even a phrase when I was a young child, I was in there, and there was a lot of time sort of spent by myself enjoying these shows. My dad, Bob, was stationed overseas at that time. And then we came back to the States, and my mother, Maggie, who's a wonderful artist, she had a bunch of drawings laying around, and I would copy those. So right around the same time, right before kindergarten, first grade, I feel like I found my direction, and I also never really deviated from that path either. But since I've loved those two things at the same time, I feel like that was sort of my initial base, like combining science fiction and superheroes and their mythology as sort of kind of a common love, that it pretty much comes out in this kind of story I want to tell. And, you're right, Trandon, and Antares almost kind of, there's a little bit of, Dune influence. There's at least several things on top of what I mentioned that have influenced this story. Antares kind of sounds like Paul Atreides from Dune. I'm sure that's where that came into play. I loved Brandon Lee in The Crow, and I decided to do on the play on the name Brandon by calling him Trandon, by combining, the first letter of my name. But I really want to sort of give a love letter, but also a real in-depth character piece of like deconstructing the superhero myth and taking all these different influences. I sell it as the Batman story. There's elements, he loses his family like a lot of common superhero myth, right? They become orphans. And, a lot of times them becoming an orphan, is maybe partially what sets them on their path. And there's a little bit of the, he's driven like Bruce Wayne is. The cell suit, which is kind of the equivalent to the Green Lantern rings, or, the lightsabers of the Jedi Knights, the talisman, is also present in the suit. That's an augmenting power suit. And then he has a really cool spaceship, which I describe as like the Batmobile and the Batcave flying around in space. It's his hot ride, and also base of operations, but a little of the DNA in his own personal story is a little more like Peter Parker. He's not a billionaire like Tony Stark or Bruce Wayne, and he is basically from a rough side of the tracks. The star system he resides in is pretty much like the poor, one of the fringe systems. And so he's got a bit of this Peter Parker. So when, like when Spider-Man's story, for anyone who doesn't know, when he gets his powers, he doesn't immediately go out and be a superhero. He uses it for selfish reasons. And of course, Uncle Ben gets killed and he has to learn a hard lesson that sends him on a path. Well, Trandon kind of has something similar, but we're sort of coming in his story real time, meaning like we're sort of introduced to him having this suit. He's just sort of barely begun on his quest to sort of track down who he believes is responsible for the loss of his family. And so when we see him, he's pretty young. He's between 18 to 20, and he's definitely not a seasoned hero. He's got a lot of experience that needs to happen to get to that more mature place. And the way that I describe it is, if you lived in a star system, and you actually had the ability to sort of become a superhero with this sort of galactic patrol, space cop things like with the Guardsmen, how would you handle it if something terrible happened to you and you end up sort of becoming that hero you dreamed of, but there's a lot of innocence lost from your young childhood? Here's, so basically in a roundabout way, his arc I describe as anti-hero to hero, but also he will become that hero he envisioned as a young child, but just once again, not in the way that he originally had foreseen.
And there's a lot of stuff going on here. And one of the things that I also want to, I guess, talk about and break into and get at is that the colony and area where he's in is filled with a lot of corruption. There's a lot of what I view as mispoliticking and taking advantage of. And there's a lot of stuff. And that's sort of why the, I guess, accident in that mining colony exploded to some degree, is some of that stuff. And so there's a lot of, injustice going on. And, we're not exactly exposed to that, I think, in the first issue per se, but it's there, and it's definitely dealing with the rougher side and in what is known as the fringe territories. And, there's not as much as like an intergalactic police force paying attention to these people. And it's very interesting when you get into this, and it's now he is somewhat taking it upon himself to sort of police that and right the wrongs and getting into that, because it's very different when there's almost no superhero around and then he's stepping into that role and he understands exactly the loss. And also, as you stated, he is a little bit selfish because he almost has, a vengeance to fulfill at the same time. And so it's very interesting when we get an imperfect superhero is how I view him.
Yeah, I mean, a much more human story. Like I'd mentioned a couple of minutes ago, definitely interested in telling that. And I will say this, not to give too much away of like some of the backstory, I want some of that to sort of unfold naturally. But I think it's even in the premise that these guardsmen that protect these 12 different star systems, from when Trandon was, say, 5 years old up until he's in his mid-teens, there's been a mysterious threat that's been wiping out these different guardsmen factions. The government, ruled by the magistrate and his cabinet, say they don't know what it is. And so the guardsmen ranks are slowly being wiped out. So, of course, in sort of standard political fashion, the remaining guardsmen factions have been told to protect the more wealthier core systems. And so within Trandon's kind of 10-year of a young lifespan, he's seen these heroes have more of a presence from a young childhood up until his mid-teens, that they were killed off. And he sort of feels let down by these heroes. And I will say this, that when you talk about kind of him being sort of like the last guardsman in that area, he's the only one, because everything has really fallen into like chaos and crime and corruption. Like, it's like a Gotham City in space. And so he doesn't realize it, but there's a bit of the Western in there too. Like, Star Wars is always described as a space Western with samurai epic flourishes. Star Trek is the space Western with the Imperial British, Navy, the exploration. Well, Black Alpha is a space Western with the superhero myth sprinkled in. So the fact that there's certain titles, the fringe territories, kind of sounds like something out of the Old West. And the way that I view like the guardsmen is, imagine, if you had a town that was overrun by corrupt cattle barons and the law enforcement has all but disappeared. There's no sheriffs or marshals or rangers around. And then one sort of shows up, but he's got almost a little more of the attitude and swagger of a gunslinger. So kind of like the classic stories like Shane, the lone hero that shows up, and he doesn't necessarily come across as intending to do good, but you end up finding there's a little bit of a core underneath that he really does care about people. So, and not to confuse everybody, but I have a number of influences, and I've tried to really streamline them into a creative stew of everything that I love. And I always have this phrase that it's my fresh coat of paint on familiar material. It's hopefully familiar enough to an audience that they can sort of get it and embrace it, but be excited about the fact that it's a brand new story and IP.
And then even going further into this, because obviously he puts on the suit, he becomes, I guess, this new Guardian, and he's almost like the last Guardian. Obviously, ranks are dwindling down. And I don't know if there's other Guardians out there, but there's not one in the vicinity. And some people who are not so nice, for lack of a better word, want that for some reason, because obviously the suit grants power. And I guess he sort of has an influence to some degree, very much, and it's very much sort of coming out of Star Wars, when I think Theron Drewy, I want to say. And so obviously there's some influence and some, I guess, old guard sort of influencing him as well. And so that's in play to some degree, I think, in which it's almost holographic of having some like knowledge bestowed to him. But even then, there might not be all the accurate information thrown out there.
Well, yeah, I was going to say the holographic mentor training program is obviously it's his Obi-Wan Kenobi. I go with the classic hero's journey flourishes, and a lot of times the young hero gets called to adventure and he initially refuses. And then usually there's a mentor sometime along the way to sort of help him out while he gets through a few of these stages of his initial sort of quest. And the talisman, King Arthur's sword, like I said, Luke's lightsaber, the Green Lantern's power rings, and the cell suit, which stands for Cyber Enhanced Link. That's what the Guardsmen have. And a little bit of the bigger backstory, going with the what if premise. If you and I lived in, say, a dozen star systems where daily life included all sorts of alien life we're exposed to daily, but not all of them are good people or good influences, and a few of them have basically the equivalent of superpowers because of whatever their alien species have abilities. How would we survive amongst aliens that either have psionic abilities, super strength, morphing technology? And so this Guardsman program was created to level the playing field. Like the humanoids in my story, they're the residents or citizens of the Caradian star systems, and one of the things that I wanted to do with the story that hopefully sets it apart from, say, a Green Lantern is that it's not Earth-based. It is like Star Wars and even Battlestar Galactica. And I take a little bit of a cue from Galactica that Earth will occasionally be mentioned in the story, but that's not the home base. And the Caradian people are aware of us, who they refer to as their Terran cousins. And so one of the fun little bits that I plan on sort of throwing a couple of Easter eggs is that Trandon and the Theron Dre, the previous pilot of the cell suit and ship that Trandon comes across, he's a fanboy of Earth. Like he hears stories. Yes, there's the ship. We'll talk about that too in a sec, because I'm a huge spaceship nerd. But this Theron Dre, the previous pilot, the previous Black Alpha per se, he makes references, like you'll see some flashbacks, and he loves Earth, and he references this sun god from a distant star, this aristocratic creature. He's referring to like Batman and Superman, but in their mythology, those stories have taken along almost like a folk hero when they travel across the stars and get to their star systems. And so Theron Dre kind of treats being a guardsman not only as an honor, but in his own way, like I get to be this kind of superheroic figure, like I've heard from our Terran cousins in their world, Earth. That's going to be a fun little kind of Easter egg to throw in there.
And so to even talk about that, because I love the fact that this isn't Earth-based, but Earth is in existence. I'm a big Foundation fan. I'm a big Isaac Asimov fan, and it's like the one interview that I wish if we could have a time machine, oh my God, it'd be phenomenal. I would love to interview him. And obviously way before my time. I'm 28, and I was born in 93, and I think Isaac died in 92, which is crazy. So maybe I'm the reincarnation of him, and I just haven't come into full bloom yet.
Hey,
but anyway,
why not?
Joking aside, I love the fact that that's in there, and that it's almost like this old Black Alpha, views Earth almost as a vacation spot to some degree and really enjoyed. and references it and probably stopped into Earth and chilled out. And then obviously there's this entire world outside of it. And I think it's very important to understand that with this book is that this is a much larger world than people, I think, are going to understand, and that what's going on is so far out. I'm a big Gundam fan, and it's kind of like when they're playing around with Hathaway and in Crossbones, they're going to start getting out to Jupiter and onward. It's pretty large when we get there. So what is that like to have a big world to play in?
Well, like you said, the universe is definitely larger, and part of that is the influence of a number of things in pop culture. And I just recently stated this on one of the earlier Kickstarter posts, is that I want Black Alpha to be kind of the comic book equivalent of like Tolkien and Frank Herbert and Star Trek and Star Wars, where there's a rich universe you can explore so many corners of, and you can do numerous spin-offs and offshoots because the universe is created as such that there's a number of tales you can tell there. But we're always introduced to, at least initially, kind of like some core characters that will make comments. I've done like a star map for Black Alpha that the characters will reference, and we may not even see some of those systems for a long time, if ever, honestly.
We're going to talk about some of that because this is super interesting because there's a concept of world building that is super, super interesting. And world building can be fun, and it could be great to go in the future, in the past, in the present. Obviously I'm a big Gundam fan. I'm a big Macross fan, and they play around in their world where, Gundam, just to stick with Gundam, Universal Century, there's Mobile Suit Gundam, and there's Warm Pocket, and there's the 08th MS team. And then fast forward 4 years, they're doing something, and then they're doing, Zeta, and then a year later they're doing Double Zeta, and some of this stuff is all happening all at once. And it's kind of crazy to do that, but it's also very cool because we get multiple elements of a story, and that's what it seems Black Alpha is going to be, because if we're playing around in one or two star sectors for these first 4 issues, you can then go and play around and have a whole event that's going on that doesn't affect any of this that's happened. Or it could be the prequel to what led to this Guardian dying at the same time, or you could just do a one-shot of an election gone wrong with a Guardian from 50 years prior. Obviously Avatar: The Last Airbender has done this with the Kyoshi stories, where we're 400 years in the past. It affects what happened in Avatar, but it doesn't affect it tremendously.
You definitely hit the nail on the head, because one of the aspects that I've really pushed this in the social eye for the last several years, and I mean, I will say this real quick to your listeners out there in your audience, that Black Alpha has been optioned 3 different times for TV and movie projects by Hollywood. And part of that is when I've pitched it, I sort of say it's supposed to be a plug and play franchisable IP, which means, and I know a lot of people currently feel that way, and, more power to everybody. But, in my particular case, I'm like, it still is designed to be exploited as comics and novels, video games, board games, toys, cartoons, movies, to sort of take advantage of that larger world. And one of the things that you just mentioned, I'm a sucker for romance stories. A lot of people don't know that about me. I love Titanic, James Cameron. I like a sort of tragic love story. And I actually have an idea. I would love to do like even if it's a mini graphic novel or a one-shot about 2 guardsmen who graduate from the academy, and it opens up with one of them is getting ready to receive some sort of Medal of Honor, and they basically have a flashback recounting their first days on their first mission, and it's a couple who fall in love, and you don't know until the end of the story who survived, because that guardsman is hidden in shadows at the beginning of the story. That's another example of like that could have been like I said, 50 years prior to Trandon's current version of that. But and you brought up the Macross thing. Somebody I talked to a number of years ago, and I'm glad they picked up on this, because certain superhero kind of archetypes and mythology sort of do kind of get shoehorned into a box. And, people know them as just tights and capes. And I want to have more global and universal appeal. And so they've sort of equated some of the part of the mythology of Black Alpha, like them being pilots, referred to as pilots of the cell suit. That's no different than them becoming like these robot jocks, except that the suit is humanoid size, but it's kind of the same connection as like, a lot of people like in the Asian stuff with like, even Pacific Rim being bound to like, basically your large avatar, whether it be organic or metallic or whatever, that, you have a unique bond with that. And so there's a little bit of that. And I've even done a couple of anime style drawings of Black Alpha to show how it could be translated. Because, you know, one of the questions I've gotten through the years, like, if this ever does become a cartoon, would you be against it being anime? And I'm like, absolutely not. It's actually honestly kind of built for that sort of storytelling, you know, or like you said, you brought up Avatar. And that's what I've always hoped, that people would kind of see the value in it. And, you know, and I'll swing around real quick to the Kickstarter. You know, I've been trying to get this comic off the ground for several years, and a lot of real life got in the way. And, you know, there's a number of things.
We're going to talk about that.
Okay, sorry.
I promise. No, it's all good. It's all good. But I do want to just table that for a few seconds, and I promise I'm going to circle back. But I do want to talk about this because we are on the Macross thing, and I like Star Trek, I like Star Wars, and you have very detailed ship designs. And Macross has detailed ship designs, and there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of detail. I don't know how many people can actually see the whole, you know, detailed thing here, but obviously there's a lot of stuff going on with this ship that he takes over. It probably has a lot of firepower and weaponry and all sorts of cool technology. And so what was this like, really building this ship and also having like the cutaways and explaining certain things with it, and also noting that it's a, you know, high class type cruiser? And so what was this like? Because this is something that I thoroughly enjoy, is, you know, big mecha ships.
It's literally a dream come true for somebody like me. Now I will state this. A friend of mine, Kevin, actually built the 3D model of that ship based upon my design. And then, you know, taking some aspects of his 3D model that he built, I decided to go ahead and start doing some of the cutaways and the deck plans and all that. And being a major Trekkie my entire life, like, I loved seeing diagrams of the Enterprise. I mean, I think it partially helps make that story more real to the audience. And so going back to that constant philosophy that I create what I love, that since I've grown up as a major spaceship nerd and I know details about most of the ships in science fiction pop culture, but mostly Star Trek, this is my version of that. And there's an old saying that the Millennium Falcon or the Enterprise or any vehicle really with anything you grow up, that's just as much of an important character as the humanoid characters or the alien characters or the robotic characters. And that's how I've treated this ship, is it's just as important of a character as the lead characters. And so to see it kind of come to life on its own, and you know, I'm actually working with a startup kind of garage kit model company. They're making a model kit of this ship, which should be available in the very near future.
And obviously there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and I do think ships matter. I think it is super, super important to, you know, have really cool ships, because when you think of Star Wars, you know, there's only certain things you think of. You think of, you know, Vader, you think of Han Solo, you think of the Millennium Falcon. You know, I don't think people's first reaction is Luke Skywalker to Star Wars. I think it's those three things first and foremost. And so obviously, you know, when you think of Star Trek, you think of the Enterprise. It doesn't matter what Star Trek, you're thinking of the Enterprise. And so ships matter. You know, when I'm watching and enjoying Robotech, or when I'm enjoying Gundam, first thing that I'm thinking of is the Gundam or a particular model. And so I do think that you hit that on the head really, really well. And so obviously, speaking about another character, and we didn't mention her yet, it's Kay Ray Ran, and well, she is a female cop who is similar to the main character, and she doesn't like corruption, and she's sort of a beat cop. And well, I have a feeling her and Trayden are going to have a very interesting working and possibly other type of relationship throughout Black Alpha.
Oh yeah, you are picking up on exactly what I'm throwing down. That's just pretty cool to hear. Yeah, Kyrie Rand is a sentry officer, and it's funny because even though I initially pitched Trandon's story as, you know, a bit of Batman, and there is a bit in his story, but ironically, I only realized this not that long ago. She's almost more Batman in a sense, because she has gadgets and she has her willpower, and she doesn't have any superpowers. And that's what I really want to come across in her character, is that she is going to do what she can to kind of clean up that corrupt system, even if it means doing it by herself and taking down kind of the rings of corruption. And so she's a lot of, and I guess you could say she's a bit, you know, well, Batman, Batgirl, Batwoman, but that sort of same very strong gadgeteer hero, and someone who's also very very human. And, there's some backstory I won't completely divulge about her. But yeah, obviously when she meets up with Trandon, there's going to be obviously a bit of friction. And I want their relationship, and I want the audience to kind of keep guessing. Will they just be friends? Will it develop into something more? You don't know yet. And it could very well go another direction than what you're thinking. I want it to really unfold organically and naturally. So.
And then I'm going to just drop this, because obviously these people may or may not be good. They may be the enemy. They may be the real good guys. But clearly, I have a feeling they're going to be somewhere in this story on something that's going on. And they look like they're the bad guys in this story. But you never know. I mean, if colors tell us anything about characters, this kind of looks like they're the bad guys. So.
Well, to be fair, I mean, there's definitely a design philosophy happening here. And in fact, if we go back to archetypes, Baron Demius in this image, he's the Darth Vader. Argos is almost like the Boba Fett meets Darth Maul. Father Mordaroth is a bit of Emperor Palpatine, and a couple other, puppet string pullers. The Lady Valendria is a notorious bounty hunter, and she's probably going to be a little more of our Selena Kyle. Zelana is kind of her own thing. But yeah, I mean, they are designed, and I had just mentioned this also recently in another interview, that I wanted to design the characters to be a number of things, like especially the villains. I want them to have a strong iconography, like a Darth Vader, like any well-known character in pop culture. Because I feel like personally, when I view new science fiction, like in films or whatever, not so much comics, but we'll say films, I feel like sometimes there's missed opportunity with these, with concept designers or concept artists to sort of create a really interesting new archetype of a bad guy, that just looks cool. And another, the Boba Fett archetype, I love characters covered from head to toe in armor. It almost makes them seem, besides mysterious, otherworldly or more than human. And so I made a conscious decision with that. And also, once again, since I've been kind of pushing this as a multi-platform IP, there's still an element of like, well, how would this look as a toy or action figure? And I've tried to keep the designs bold but simple. That's kind of another philosophy I have. And going with like Ben 10. Ben 10 is a perfect example.
And even going further, and this is going to sound messed up, but sometimes as a comic reader, I am extremely lazy, where I want to know just by sight who's good and who's bad. I'm a big wrestling fan, and you know who the bad guy is by the way they walk, by their ring gear, by the way they speak. And you don't have to play the guessing game. Rather, you're more interested in their actions. And I mean, it was pretty simple for me to figure out that these group of characters are the bad guys, while these group of characters right here are the good guys, just based on colors and just based even on their posture. And it's kind of nice when it's very obvious. Now, you might not know the reasons why they're bad, or why they did what they did, or if it was an accident, or if it was intentional, or they're trying to assassinate somebody. That's all up in the air. But when I look at these guys over here, it is evidently clear they are bad. I think it is a very, very hard argument not to get that. And so I like that when I'm reading comics, because now I'm like, okay, we could really focus on the conflict. We don't have to establish they're good or bad anymore, which I think helps tremendously in a lot of ways.
Well, and my hope is, I hope we have the space to, tell the stories properly, but I also have a goal of treating even the villain characters with a certain amount of depth. And also just sort of maybe they'll surprise you with some of the things you find out about them. That's the bigger goal. I hope we can actually do that properly, but that's what I hope to do with most characters. But I even want to give the bad guys their space and not have them be mustache twirling villains that are just like, I'm doing evil just because it's fun. I want to give them a little bit of backstory, like anyone. I've heard that recently, like with the way Thanos was portrayed in the Avengers movies, the villain usually thinks they're the hero of their own story. And I've also felt kind of intrigued by the fact that the hero and a lot of times the villain have a connection in personal levels in comic books. And it's almost like the villain and the hero were faced with similar circumstances and they both just went on a different path and how they dealt with it. And I've always found that very interesting.
Yeah, and I think they're gonna find out a bunch of stuff about what's about to happen with them and everything in between, and what happened and why there was a fork in the road between
Hmm.
certain characters and other characters, and also, villains sometimes aren't good to other villains. So I think there's a lot of
Exactly.
stuff that we're gonna find out, and we're gonna have a bunch of reasons and backstories. But I definitely want to table the rest of this stuff because I do want people to back and pick up this Kickstarter. But we do have to talk about the elephant in the room. I teased it slightly, and well, that's Big Bang.
Hmm.
Because you had some cool stuff on Big Bang, and it was in, I think Stewart's shop, I think,
Yep.
it was on the wall, and there's some concept art. And then also there was this over here, which is, I guess, an early, action figure, or even, a later action figure. And so obviously, how did all of this come about? Because it's kind of a crazy circumstance to be in Big Bang. And I don't know if you know this, but Brimstone was on this show, and he's a wrestler, and he had some
Hmm.
stuff on Big Bang.
Yep. Yeah, I know who he is, definitely. Um,
So what was that like, and how did that come about?
a friend of mine that I met online on Facebook, he was getting his comic on there, and him and I started conversing. And so he had contacts with the show, and I signed a contract with the show. Basically, kind of this bartering system. They get stuff to use as prop set dressing in the numerous sets. I don't have to pay them, and vice versa. Um, and actually, when you brought up like the action figure, but more so correctly, it's a maquette, a little, a statue in Raj's apartment. Was that there's also a ship, Black Alpha ship that we just talked about. There's a copy of that in another part of Raj's apartment, and it's sitting right above the Millennium, or excuse me, a TIE fighter. And that was really fun to see that my ship that I came up with is sitting on top of one of my favorite ships from Star Wars. Um, yeah, it's just, and I think it's just weird synergy. Like, Big Bang became this huge hit. And the weird thing was, and this unfortunately never happened. I got sizes for Johnny Galecki and Jim Parsons as Leonard and Sheldon, and they were supposed to wear Black Alpha T-shirts on the show, but that never ended up happening. And I think probably not too long after that, especially Sheldon was predominantly wearing like DC characters. And I think that's the reason why. But it was just a fun thing. It was a bit of a footnote where I'm like, that's cool to see, something that I've created my imagination in various like merchandise prototype forums, being on the show. And it was on quite a few episodes. And I've been so busy for years, I actually didn't really watch the show that much. In fact, both of those pictures that you brought up were other people on Facebook going, "Oh, hey, so look what I saw." So I would collect all those, and then it was really cool that they were like, "Hey, it was."
To even go further into this, because
Mhm.
obviously it's really good advertising. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's also a lot of verification, and it's also the idea saying, "Hey, I came up with this concept, and that it was on Big Bang." And I think even the comic shop thing is a little bit more important the way I view it, because
Hmm.
it looks like it's in a comic store. I have a feeling that that was a real comic store. I have a feeling, and I don't think I could be wrong, but that's not really a set piece, because that looks way too real to be.
It's a set, but they definitely pulled it off. That's for sure. I mean,
So,
everything on those shows are actual sets that are built.
but it looks legitimately like a comic book store, and it looks exactly how. And if anybody's been in a comic store, you could imagine walking into that store
Oh, for
very
sure.
easily. And that's something that I think is very cool about this, where it's so weird, because the comic scenes are just so authentic. They're
Hmm.
arguably the most authentic component out of the entire show.
Oh, for sure. I mean, as a lifelong comic fan, I think they nailed it. There's no breaking the fourth wall there. When you watch the characters in the show, you believe that is the real deal, the culture, the kind of fans that are there. I mean, any of us can relate to that 100% for sure, And I think the show did a great job of really. It's interesting because pop culture has sort of done this weird reverse thing where like all the nerd stuff that sort of made it feel like an exclusive club when a lot of us, especially my age, were younger. That it's interesting how the Marvel movies have taken off and video game culture, but even the Big Bang, I think that's part of the reason that show became so huge, because it is a reflection of the current age where nerd culture is mainstream culture now.
And all the nerds who have all the cool stuff and got beat up and shoved into lockers playing Pokemon now are running
Yep.
the world. And are selling all their collectibles for real money.
Yeah.
And what I like about this is that obviously from a business standpoint, and people who know me know my entire thing that I'm doing is I'm big into indie comics right now, and I'm actually buying and selling indie comics. I'm getting into that. I'm in the process of booking a semi-indie comic variant. And so what's going on is that if I had a store, sometimes what'll probably happen if I picked up a bunch of indie books, they might give me a poster. And that's what this almost seems like in a lot of ways, is that this is what that is. And that's why this is so cool, because it is almost that, but now you're on a show that was one of the most popular shows in the last 6 seasons of it, and it's still extremely popular, and this gets rerun all the time, and you have a Kickstarter going on, and so it's almost perfect. And then even going further, somebody might not know exactly what Black Alpha is, but they're going to be like, oh man, that poster looks awesome. And then every time the episode gets rerun, it's just another advertisement in a lot of ways, especially both of those episodes, and all the more than 2 episodes actually.
Yeah.
So I just think it's awesome, and I think it's like the perfect, thing. So obviously I think it's awesome, and it's pretty cool. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, it's definitely been a lot of fun for sure.
And now, I definitely want to circle back to Kickstarter. So obviously, I think the first issue's done for the most part. I don't know how far you are with the second issue. Black Alpha, I think it's Black Alpha, right? I gotta make sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God. I didn't mess up yet. But it's been optioned a few times, and then obviously you wanted to do this comic, and life got in the way. So what has this been like? Because it's been a very interesting journey to get to this stage, going through, developing the concept, hitting it to big bang with some concept art, and then now, fast forward 2021, this Kickstarter is now funded, which means that it is now going to be made. It's only a matter of time to send it off to the printer and then tape up your boxes.
Well, I will say that I was really apprehensive for a number of years about Kickstarter. There was a general stage fright, because, I think any indie creator especially can sort of relate to the fact, how is it going to be received? Even if you're asking for a smaller amount, there's still a minor chance you're not going to hit your goal.
It's even worse. What do you do? If you're asking for $500 and you don't hit your goal, that's even worse.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I've seen a few projects that's happened to.
I mean, I'm terrified to go kickstart this show, because what if I fail? It's rough. Like, I'm not scared to fail on an interview, but I'm terrified to fail publicly on Kickstarter, because if it doesn't hit, it's not good. And then even furthermore, if you ask for $2,000 and you only make $2,100, that's not good either.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So there was definitely an apprehension, and I struggled with, was there going to be a stigma if it failed? And I've had a lot of roller coaster with this IP, like I said, and I'll be the first to admit it. For full transparency, when I talked to a number of Hollywood studios over the years, you get distracted by that stuff, because there's stars in your eyes. Oh, they're going to make this into a cartoon or something. And a lot of times, more often than not, it falls apart. And so what I decided to do in the last year or two is really circle back around the fact that I've had a pretty loyal audience, that having at least a percentage have not given up, and they want to know the story. And I'm like, I owe it to themselves and myself to really get some content in their hand, a narrative that hopefully they can enjoy. And so I met some guys online over the last couple of years that are WTF Comics. And I was approached about a year ago from them about the idea of launching Black Alpha as a Kickstarter. And it took a while to sort of build it and get there. But yeah, and I will admit, it was very thrilling the first day to be, like within the first hour, we were already third funded what we were asking for. So that felt great. But, and we're not done, by the way. I keep reemphasizing, we got about 8 or 9 days left, and we're still trying to raise some more funds to kind of basically, keep the books moving farther along. I mean, real quick, you asked, book 1 has been done for quite some time. There's bonus content in the Kickstarter reward of issue 1. There's a few pages of issue 1 that I started and have done. And so the artist, John Rossetti, who's worked for Cartoon Network on the Venture Brothers, has been brought in to help me. We're going to collaborate to do issue 2. And at this point, it looks like we'll probably end up having to do issue 2 and then do another Kickstarter for 3 or 3 and 4 before we get the miniseries wrapped up.
So
I'm
we're
sorry,
going to talk about rewards in a second, I promise, because that's the selling point. And I love talking about Kickstarter rewards, but even this idea, because there is a whole, debate on indie books and kickstarting and running a Kickstarter, and even the idea of, would you be opposed to doing a Kickstarter for issue 2 regardless of funds, just because it's such an easy distribution method for people, and people use Kickstarter as a distribution method. I back projects that were going to get into Diamond anyway, but it was just easier for me to do it on Kickstarter. And people obviously want this stuff, and it's not an issue anymore of funds sometimes when you have certain series that are done. And also it's cheaper sometimes for somebody just to get it on Kickstarter. There have been books, I think of Charles Soule and Ryan Brown's Curse Words, where it was $80 to get the complete hardcover edition on Kickstarter than if I was to go to Barnes & Noble or, Amazon and buy it. It would have been like $100, $120. And so that's how I view Kickstarter in a lot of ways, is that it's just the easiest, not to mention that Diamond is legitimately fucking everybody over for the next 6 months.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, there's a paradigm shift. And I will say this, that, what I do like about Kickstarter, what I'm learning is it's definitely a direct conduit to sort of engaging your fans for your project. I think they feel a little more personally involved. There's excitement there. I mean, right now at this point, I won't mention who, but, we are currently talking to a couple of pretty big indie publishers that are interested in publishing. And one of them specifically is huge in the indie world. And it's just a matter of us getting completed content to them. Obviously, if you're going to try and hook up with a publisher, they want, to comfortably be able to solicit knowing that your miniseries is all done. And one specifically said, well, we love what you do. We'd love to work with you on numerous IPs of yours. We're not in a huge hurry. So just kind of do what you need to get done on your end. And that's just kind of where we're at currently. And I can't reiterate enough that with the support of Kickstarter and kind of a new way of engaging your audience and hopefully building new audience, there's a much more of an intimate connection, I think, with the backers that, I feel like you get a lot more ideas for what you're creating and kind of how things are handled. And so that is something that it's new to me anyway, that I'm very excited about. And I will say this, I'm also very grateful after, as launching my very first Kickstarter that has done so well. I'm very appreciative of that because, there's a lot of project for first timers. There's a bit of a struggle,
Yeah, and Kickstarter is a very, very interesting beast because there's a lot of stuff going on with Kickstarter. There's a lot of discussions going on with Kickstarter. Obviously a lot of people are signing deals with independent publishers now, and they're still working on Kickstarter. And it's very interesting, and also it's very intimate as well. And also there's a whole discussion, and obviously I have an opinion on Scott Snyder and Keanu Reeves, where I think they're good for Kickstarter, but I don't think they're a strategy for Kickstarter. And people made fun of me for what I said, where I said what's going to happen is that they're going to come in, they raise all ships, a lot of air gets into the room, and then when they leave, air left. And what's actually happened is that when in 2020, more projects got funded on Kickstarter, and especially about a month before and a few months after, both Keanu Reeves and Scott Snyder and a few other creators also released in a very short time period. A lot of people's projects got funded. Same time in 2021, less projects got funded. So, which means that there's been a void. And, it's the idea that, a rising tide raises all ships, but then when that tide recedes, every ship comes back down again. And so people made fun of me for it. People said, you're wrong. And data suggests otherwise. And not to toot my own horn, but obviously it's a very interesting beast because of that right now. And when they come back, those people come back into Kickstarter, it's going to have the exact same effect again, I believe.
Yeah, I suppose I probably need to do my own research about kind of my own opinion. I mean, I can see the validity of what you're saying, and then I hear other viewpoints that try and claim that isn't true. I don't know enough about it to have a strong opinion about it yet. I do think that, like you said, that the big superstars that come in, and I've seen even comic creators that don't get work with the big two anymore. They've learned to turn Kickstarter into a viable career for themselves by, Ron Randall and Trekker is a good example of, he gets massive support for that IP now. And I've seen a few other people kind of more from my era, like Carl Kessel, has Impossible Jones, that I think, these people now, because of their previous Kickstarters, awareness and support in the community, are easily able to raise 20 grand in a week. I don't know at some point. I mean, I guess I'm not going to say that I wouldn't mind being at that level, but that's not my goal initially. I mean, I just want to be able, like right now, the big milestone for me is to get these other 3 issues and get the complete miniseries done, and then do it as a trade paperback. And if I get that done, I'll feel like I've died and gone to heaven, because that's a milestone I've been waiting for several years now to kind of have, to fall into place. And I had to sort of finally give in and realize I need help. I can't do this by myself, and that's been part of the issue why, it's been kind of sitting dormant, even though I've been trying to keep people interested in it, and you would know this, and I know this, but some of the lay people out there don't realize how incredibly labor intensive it is to produce a comic book. It's not just a simple, you do a few scribbles and you have someone write a few notes and voila. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into doing a comic book. And when you're trying to balance it with other parts of your life, in my case, like I said, I have had a career, I have a day job, I'm a new dad. So time management becomes a completely new skill for me. And that's why we ended up having to kind of go with bringing an artist in to help out.
And also just the idea that, you have a life, and that, you're married, and that, you can't just tell your significant other, hey, I'm going to be busy for the next 3 months every night from 9 to 4 in the morning. It doesn't work that way, because that's a disaster for things falling apart. And so it goes way more into that, and it's crazy. But anyway, I'm going to table that because I do want to talk about rewards. Okay. So you have the digital reward, and then you have, I think, a physical copy, which I believe this is the cover A. Yeah. And then you also have, you could pick for 15 one of these 2 variants, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then this is an exclusive variant that I think is pretty much exclusive to the Kickstarter. Yep. And then we get into stuff like this where now we get, some cool stuff, cover A, and pick one variant. Excuse me. And then obviously T-shirts, trading cards, all that stuff. And then more cool stuff. You get a signed copy of cover A and some other cool stuff out there. And then obviously we get this stuff out there, which is the lunchbox, because what better way how to carry your lunch than with Black Alpha? I'm just saying, you'll be the coolest kid. It'll be 80s style. Everybody will be upset and jealous at you at the office. If you go back to the office, that is. Exactly. I'm just saying it's a fair argument. And then there's this stuff. So obviously, for those who don't know, you did Punisher 2099 and worked on it and did some stuff with that for Marvel back in the day. And so obviously, there's some signed Pop Funkos. There's some comics that you can sign that are in here. And so what is this like to be able to, A, bring stuff that I guess is in the vault, bring stuff from your career at Marvel, because, you're not just coming out of the woodworks with the first comic. You're a veteran creator. And then also, I don't know how difficult, a Punisher Pop Funko is, but you may not be the easiest person to track down, especially in the last 18 months. And some of these books might not be easy to track down either. And so what is this like to offer that? Because it is very cool.
Well, what is interesting about it for me, the feeling I guess I get is that, where my career has been, I've always been kind of the victim of bad timing. And so I was the last artist on Punisher 2099, and I wasn't on the book for very long before it got canceled. And that was the boom, the implosion that happened during kind of the little bit of the leftover of the explosion of the Image 90s and the speculator market.
I know all about that. This is like my background. Yep. So I was an infant at the time.
So interestingly enough, that was a bit of a hard lesson in education, because when you have a dream and you want to get your foot in the door, there's all these emotions. Part of you is going, oh, wow, I can't believe my dream has come true. I'm on cloud nine. And then you think you're going to just stay there. And I learned the hard way that there's a number of things you don't count on. And so, and I was having trouble. In fact, I talked to a number of creators who had been published for years. They were telling me, they're like, you're brand new. I've been doing this for years, and even I'm having a hard time getting work. And so sometime after that, I transitioned to working in video games, concept art, because some of my comic book colleagues said there's a big call for it. The money is way better. Your salary, you got benefits, etc. And it's a whole different kind of animal on how you approach the art. But I will say this, that I was excited being on Punisher 2099 because I always wanted a book that I could give my stamp to. You know what I mean? Like some people, it's their dream to work on the X-Men or Batman or Spider-Man. I wanted a kind of lesser known character somewhat that you can sort of leave your mark with. I think, if things had been differently, that probably could have been a big career definer for me. So the Punisher 2099, the Jake Gallows character, I have an interesting history with. In fact, I was just saying this recently. I would love to do a new drawing of him with my current style as opposed to the style that I did back then, and then they've been sort of trying to kind of bring back the 2099 line. But
and
yeah,
also,
I mean,
cool. Yeah, what's cool about this is that obviously there's a Pop Funko of it. So when you were working on Punisher 2099, there was no Pop Funko of it.
Nope.
And there's a Pop Funko of it. And obviously that's something that's cool. That is a very new product in as far as collectibles and all that stuff. And I saw a bunch of Pops. And so what is that like, knowing that a character you worked on, there's a Pop Funko of it, and then finding a bunch of these Pop Funkos and then signing them? Because it's tricky with rewards because you have to find some of this stuff.
Well, I will say this, that I think those Pops of the Punisher, of the Jake Gallows version, are so unique and kind of, like you said, somewhat rare, because some people even asked me if those were customs. And I think that there's certain characters, like, if you go to any mall and you see the Pops, you're always going to see Deadpool, obviously. You're going to see the Spider-Mans. And so it's fun to know that at least there was somebody who was interested in creating, the Jake Gallows version. I mean, I have a Funko Pop of myself. I have a Funko Pop of Black Alpha and one of my other characters, Salem Tusk. And those are all custom jobs, So it's cool to know that at least in some little corner there, there's the Black Alpha Pop, that somebody cared enough about Jake Gallows not to make him simply like a vaporous footnote in comic history. So, but the interesting thing about what that character represents and kind of a path I was on was that there were a number of people asking me about a decade ago, would I like to try and work for Marvel again? And there's a lot of politics that happen, with any entertainment industry faction. And I decided that I'm like, rather than trying to, because it's a very labor intensive young man's game, rather than actually trying to get back in doing stuff for Marvel, even though in some ways that's monumental for anybody's career, I'm like, if I'm going to spend the time doing comic book content, I'm actually going to finally do my characters. So there was a bit of a catalyst there with, thinking about the Punisher 2099 and my career and where it could have been, and so that sort of really ignited this new fire that I wanted to get around to characters I've talked about wanting to do most of my life.
Yeah, there's a lot of politics in comics, to say the least. I don't know how much you know about my background, but I've had Denny O'Neil on my other show. I've had Chuck Dixon, and Denny and Chuck are the complete polar opposites, yet they arguably wrote the greatest Batman story of all time. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those circumstances where that doesn't exist anymore, and there's certain politics that aren't allowed in comics, and it's very problematic. And that's why you see a lot of people, sometimes don't work for DC, or people keep their politics to themselves. And I know way too many people who are in that circumstance, and that it's very unfortunate. And also it even goes further to just work politics and a variety of other stuff. And it is a very cutthroat bitch environment, comics right now, in those big
and to clarify, when I say politics, I'm not talking about, the technical, voting for one party, another kind of politics.
That's an issue of itself, though. That's a big issue.
Yeah. This is the politics that are generally referred to in the entertainment industry. There's a lot of political levels to sort of get your career going. You know what I mean? And there's a number of little games that are played. And I tend to be, I grew up in the upper Midwest, so I'm very much more, I'm a straight shooter. I like things to be simple from point A to point B. And so I mean, I've had to play the game a little bit, but I feel fortunate that I haven't had to play it a lot. You know what I mean? Because hopefully I feel like my personality and what I'm able to do, the talent shines through, and I don't have to play as much as those Mickey Mouse games. But, by sort of sidelining that is sort of doing my own characters in any way. You know what I mean? Like that's the one thing I keep reiterating to indie creators. There's never been a more amazing time for the indie creator, because you don't need somebody, you don't need a gatekeeper with the keys going, okay, I'm going to open up the door for you. You can find a number of ways. If you want to do a comic, you create the comic, you can do a web comic, you can get it out to an audience. And that to me is very empowering. Now I've had to deal with the politics on the Hollywood end, because like I said, I'm still more point A to point B. So when somebody comes in and says, we want to make this a cartoon or movie, and they seem passionate about it, at least at the beginning, you're like, oh, well, cool. They're going to work their hardest to make a cartoon. You know what I mean? And a lot of times, and people would be surprised to know this, anything that you've ever seen on TV, any movie that you've ever viewed, like a Walking Dead, it's almost a miracle they even got there, because there's so many things that can go wrong or fall apart before it even goes to day one of production. I've experienced that firsthand now, that somebody could be interested in your project and then they leave the studio or they get canned and your project is no longer on their pipeline of development. That's where a lot of things you hear about being announced end up in development hell, as it's called, because there's so many factors that are at play. And that's the other thing I will cheerlead comic creators about, is at least, comics, like I said, they're not easy to produce, but they're definitely in some instances easier to produce than trying to get a big film or TV project off the ground. And you're still getting a narrative out to an audience to digest.
There's a reason why the people Avatar: The Last Airbender continued this series in comic books. To produce a television show is expensive. If you hire the best artist and the best writer, it is still cheaper to produce a hardcover 128-page graphic novel than to produce an episode of television. It is undeniably, and it's in many ways easier to sell a book than it is to sell a television one-episode pilot. And there's a lot less risk, and there's a lot less expenditure, and also it's easier to sell a 28-page issue and then get 5 of them and then put them into a nice bound book. It's so much easier, and also it's much faster, because you legitimately can do that in 5 months. You could produce 128 pages without having to kill your writer or your artist in 5 months, and then send it off to China to be printed for legitimately $5. And the entire process for 128 pages from concept to landing is less than 30 grand at the most. And so obviously producing a television show on 30 grand, good luck.
I will say this too, while I'm thinking about it, I do want to give a shout out to, I know you've had Ruben Romero on the show. I'm good friends with him. I've known him for years.
5 fucking times.
Yeah. And also Bob Sally, with, he's got a Kickstarter currently running. I have to give those guys a shout out, because I've loved the fact that those two guys that I know personally have a tenacity to continue to get comic book content created. And they've utilized stuff like Kickstarter. And I love the fact that, I don't know all the ins and outs, but whether or not they've been approached by the Hollywood thing, they've not allowed themselves to be distracted. Like, I'm going to continue forging forward. So I've really tried to kind of use them as a personal inspiration, that no matter what happens with Black Alpha, if it ever does become an animated thing or a cartoon or whatever, we're going to focus on the comic and continue to move that forward. If any of those other opportunities or a version of that ever comes up or arises, I'll consider that like winning the lottery. It'll be a nice surprise. But those guys have, whether or not they know it, they've sort of helped get me back on the path, along with the guys at WTF, to really focus on, let's make comics the thing. This is the thing that, is going to be more easily creatable. And now you're getting your audience involved, and hopefully, they enjoy the story. And this will be the one thing that, that they can get into. Because I've said it for years. I didn't realize it, but yeah, I've been selling a concept really for the last several years on Facebook, that I'm appreciative that certain people think Black Alpha kind of looks or sounds cool, but that's all it's ever been, as a concept. And so now this Kickstarter is a new milestone to go, hey, guess what? We're finally going to get this into the audience hands, which is, I know some of them have literally waited years for. And like I said, I appreciate their passion and patience for sticking around.
Yeah, and I love Ruben, and Ruben knows that I like him. Obviously, he's been on 5 times. I don't know when he's coming back on. After 5 times, I need a break. Also, his writing partner Casey needs to catch up. I don't know if you know Casey Bowker, but Casey needs to catch up. So if Casey's
Yeah.
watching this, it's all on Casey and Ruben. You can go bother Casey because you're not coming back on until Casey gets up to 5. But anyway, so it's contingent. And Ruben knows I'm kidding. He knows I'm kidding, or hopefully he does.
Yeah.
But even going further into this, because obviously I do want to back out of the rewards. I know there's some stretch goals, and there's a lot of options. Everything from I think a $6 or $8 digital position all the way up to $250, $300. I think is where you max out. There's something for everybody at every level. So obviously, if you just want a regular cover A and you're a cover A guy, or if you want some variants, obviously that's the way to go. I think there's some package deals for everything as well. So there's something for everybody in this. Obviously, the custom pop, the lunchbox is super cool. I like old school lunchboxes. So obviously, I think that's awesome. Custom pops are huge. I love Pop Funkos. I am a Pop Funko fanatic.
Same here.
So having said all that, though, I am curious because obviously this is your first Kickstarter, I think, that you've done. And we sort of touched on a little bit, but what has that been like? Because it is crazy when you first do your Kickstarter and there's all sorts of stuff going on. So what has that been like? And where do you think the future of crowdfunding is going?
For me, like I said, the emotions were kind of all over the place. I mean, I tried not to be nervous, and we tried to do sort of that sort of getting the audience primed by making announcements like we have 1 or 2 weeks until the official launch. We try to utilize that, gaining some followers in the pre-launch page. And then I remember the night before, I even made a post about it on my Facebook. I said, I'm slightly nervous, but mainly excited. I sort of felt confident. And so when Jack and I launched the Kickstarter, it was, kind of mid Tuesday morning. Within 2 seconds, I saw the contributions coming in immediately. And then the ticker just kept going. And so there was a bit of a rush that went with that. And I think that initial kind of like I said, I put 48 hours, but it was technically just a little over a day because kind of when it launched, not to get into semantics, but it still was, a pretty fast moving launch for a first time, Kickstarter project for me, for the guys at WTF, for unknown IP. I think we did pretty well. And like I said, now we're just kind of moving to this new phase of probably educating some people about how Kickstarter works. When you meet your initial goal, and then, you're sort of going, well, now we've met that and we've got 3 weeks to now work on stretch goals. I know some people probably will be like, well, wait a second. I thought this first goal, which I helped contribute to, was going to put you over the edge so that you can get rolling. And so there's a bit of an education, not just for them, but for me, to how to kind of word that and say, this is just kind of the beginning. We're always hoping we can move a little upward from here, including even raising more funds, because that all is going to be beneficial in the end to, I will say this, with transparency, we didn't probably get to some of the goal that we might have kind of hoped we would meet for first time. I mean, one of it was to sort of get enough to sort of kind of keep John Rossetti, and I hope he does stay involved, to help at least get started on issue 3, to not just do issue 2, but issue 3 and ideally issue 4. But the way it's looking, we're going to focus on issue 2, and that's all good. It's still a win. It's still a milestone. I never want to come across as ungrateful. And there's also just kind of an element of like, what's your expectations versus the reality? You're happy that it got funded. It got funded quickly. And I've been listening to a couple of podcasts that have been very good for first time Kickstarter people, because when you happen to check out other campaigns and you see them raise $50,000 in a few days, you don't want to unfairly start judging yourself against them. There's a number of factors: what kind of project it is, what kind of audience and market they have. Obviously board games do generally very well. You can't compare comic projects to board games. And also, what kind of a comic is it? What's the market? What's the audience?
Also, who's behind it? I don't know how many episodes you've looked, but you can't compare yourself against the Santine Phoenix.
Exactly.
Santine Phoenix is like the queen of D&D. And so she had a book with over $250,000 in Kickstarter. But her name, her social media, what she's known for, company that she's worked for, her friends, the AEW book that came out, you can't compare. But then again, you can do a bunch of little tiny tricks that make a huge difference, that can mean the difference between 6,000 and 10,000. And then that's when it really matters to employ tricks. There's a bunch of little tricks that I utilize in my podcast that make me go from having 50 plays to having 300 with very little effort. And it's those tiny little tricks that make a huge difference. And so that's something that I've learned. And I think Kickstarter is the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Jack and I, because like I said, Jack built the campaign. He's the one that I work closely with the most from WTF. And I think there's always a learning curve in there. You know, I mean, him, I've already been discussing, kind of with another crowdfunder down the road, what will we do the same? What will we do differently? And yeah, I mean, it is really a matter of just sort of navigating the space and learning kind of, like you said, your own little tricks to help you build traction. I will say something real quick note on when you mentioned D&D. My Uncle Tom is in town visiting with my dad, and they actually grew up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And my Uncle Tom was very good friends with Gary Gygax when they were younger. And so was my great Uncle John. I have a picture of Gary Gygax, the guy that started D&D, with my Uncle John when they were both probably about 8 or 9 years old. So we sort of have this weird familial personal connection to the whole D&D world because of, a lot of my family's in Lake Geneva, which is where they were, started and based out of.
And then obviously I want to table all that before we dive down a rabbit hole. And I am curious because obviously we are talking about Kickstarter. I want to talk about the cousin of Kickstarter because the last 18 months have been very complicated in the con world. And obviously COVID hit, cons didn't happen pretty much March 2020. Cons are now happening. But I have a lot of friends who say, hey, I was going to Baltimore Comic-Con, now I'm not going. This Delta variant with COVID is now in play. Obviously the U.S. government, again, no politics, doesn't really know what the hell's going on either. And I am just as confused as everybody else with the news because legitimately every 5 seconds it's something new. I'm not going to a con till probably June of 2022 for economic reasons. Also, right now I'm going through a sell-off with a lot of merchandise, so I'm cash poor, as well as the fact that I want to let the dust settle. And so I'm curious how you view it because obviously you've been part as a veteran in the comic world and you've been through a bunch of different elements that have cons attached to them. And where do you see it going? Because it is very different. And where do you even see them, adjusting? Because obviously change needs to occur.
Well, I will say this, that I kind of like to respect other people's feelings. And when it comes to COVID, I keep mine to myself. As far as the cons go, I did a self-imposed exile 5 years ago because I had nothing new to share. So I actually just got done doing a con exactly a month ago to talk about the Kickstarter, to talk about this documentary film that my friend Callan High is making about me. That's been 1.5 years that it's being filmed, and we have a little bit more to do. And we're actually doing another con in October, and we had a blast being at the con that we were at. And I guess, as far as cons in the COVID age, I guess that's one of those, like, everyone's just going to have to kind of keep riding the wave and take the data and make decisions based upon that. I personally, I had no fear when I did the con recently, and it turned out to be just fine. I have no worry, granted, but I'm in a different state too. I know that's probably affecting people per state.
So I'm in Connecticut, so I'm in the Northeast. So in the Northeast, it's different if you're in, Montana is very different than the Northeast, and so like New York Comic Con's coming down the road, and I'm just like, and also I'm not a big con guy. 100,000 people is too many people, regardless of COVID or not. It's just too many people.
Well, I've loved cons. I've been going to them for 32 years now. My very first con was the '89 San Diego Comic Con when Batman premiered with Michael Keaton. That was Shangri-La. It's like coming to the Magic Land. And through the years, cons represent something different for me. And I will say this, I've never really gone as just a fan. Some year I'd like to do that, but I've always gone being part of the nerd community, but also with an agenda or a mission. And that was to get into comics. And now I'm promoting my own comics, and that's what cons, but I really enjoy meeting, the like-minded people with all the unique personalities and the cosplayers. And, I really thrive in that element. So I personally enjoy them. And I get kind of an idea of how my project's going to do just by having people come over and talk about it, just getting kind of the reaction. And I do think it is an important part of marketing in this day and age, especially there's so much white noise to swim through. when, to filter through, especially getting new content out there more than ever now, because there's so many things. So I think you have to sort of do, for the most part, what it takes: sell on social media, sell in person, go to Comic-Con, go to comic book stores, do a signing there. And so I'm excited about this new con that I'm doing, new for me anyway, in October. It's roughly 2.5 months away. That's going to be a fun one. I know a lot of the creators that are going to be there from like Marvel and DC, and so I get to see some old friends again, and I'm excited about that. But I've just been excited about doing cons again, especially, like I said, because of the kind of real life stuff getting in the way. And I initially started shilling Black Alpha at these things, and I would sell out of my own little self-published copies. And then because of real life getting in the way, I didn't have a lot of movement past issue 1. And so I felt like after a while, I'm like, well, I could come here and do this, but this particular con, like I said, we have the model kit to talk about, and we have the documentary film to talk about, and then we had the Kickstarter to talk about. So I felt revitalized and reinvigorated to basically be at cons, and my purpose for being there.
No, I feel you. I feel you. In which that I'm going to be coming back to cons, but I needed a break. In which that after doing a lot of panel work at cons and going there and expenditure, I just needed a break from it.
Yeah.
And I was also running out of content ideas for panels, and I wasn't enjoying it as much because when you feel like you have to be there, sometimes you need a break, and sometimes you need time off can be very helpful in a lot of ways. But that's just me. Other people are having different. So.
Well, I was going to say, and I know cons have different effects on people, and there have been some people out there that kind of lamented how cosplayers have become a bigger thing, and celebrities are brought out to kind of push what they're involved with. And I think certain people feel like the comics industry and the genre and other aspects got pushed to the side. Depending upon which con, that might be true, but I'm just like, I'm more focused on what am I here for. Some of those factors are true, but I try not to compete with that. And it doesn't do anything for me mentally to sort of bring myself down by saying, well, things would be better if there weren't as many cosplayers here or there weren't as many celebrities. I'm just like, this is kind of a different age. This is what cons have become. I still need to focus on what I'm here to do and do it to the best of my ability. Real quick, just so you know, and I don't mean to offend you, I'm speaking of time management. I am looking at the time, and I probably will have to wrap this up in about 5 minutes, if that's okay.
So I was about to get to that because I'm about to give you the ability to self-promote.
Okay.
So
awesome.
Obviously,
we're in tandem here.
Where can people find you? Where can people support the Kickstarter? Obviously, going beyond the Kickstarter, where can people, support your projects, check you out, and all that stuff? Because obviously, we got Black Alpha, and that is up for another 9 or 8 days or so. And obviously, I want people to back that. But where can people follow you on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook pages? If you got a website, that's super important. That documentary, just staying informed on it and all that stuff.
Right or wrong, I still do 99% of my promotion on my personal Facebook page. I think that I like the back and forth, the interaction, personal connection. So if anyone wants to talk to me or find out about what I'm doing, it's under Tom, Tom, Rasch, Rasch. Once again, that's Rasch because people go with the traditional spelling. And you can find me on there. And like I said, I've shared a number of the years of me doing stuff on there. There's the WTF Comics website, WTF, which I will say this is not what it sounds like it stands for, but it's memorable. So it's WTF Comics. And then I have a Twitter for Black Alpha. I've never done a personal Twitter. And then there's also a Tom Rasch, TomRasch Instagram that Jack is partially utilizing to sort of get my brand out there with my comic work and my art in general, but also Black Alpha. And if anyone's interested in checking out the Kickstarter, like most people, I'm usually promoting it on my page and some of the groups at least 2 to 3 times a day. So if any of this sounds, interesting to anybody out there in your audience, and, I've used this kind of marketing ploy, like with everything I said at the beginning. If you like Marvel and DC superheroes, if you like Star Trek and Star Wars or stuff like Guardians of the Galaxy, chances are you're going to like something like Black Alpha.
And on that note, and I've been saying this all along, you have to support indie And what that means is that you have to back people's Kickstarters, their projects. It goes such a long way to go do that. And it is super important. Now, I understand that money is tight for some people. And if you're in that circumstance, the next best thing that you can do is share the project around, because that goes also very far. Share it on your Facebook wall, share it on your Twitter, share it in your Instagram story, because you never know who's watching and you never know who can back it. And also, if you have a friend who's interested in and you back this project, share it to your friend, because they might back it too. And they say, this looks awesome and I'm excited and I didn't even know this existed. That's happened to me. It goes a long way. Also, if you want to support this show, please share this episode and buy me a coffee. You can utilize it. Obviously, again, you have to support indie content of all sorts. And on that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, I just want to say once again, Andrew, thank you for having me on the show. I accidentally discovered your show probably about a week or so ago. That's the magic of social media. And I had a chance to check out a few of your programs. And I reached out to you going, this guy has a great show. I really would like to be on it. And so I want to say thank you. I think you do have a great show. I very much have enjoyed my time being on here. I would love to come on again sometime. Maybe not 5 times like Ruben, but we'll see. We'll see when we get to that point. But yeah, I definitely have enjoyed being on the show. And so I just want to kind of give you a call out for your show and you being a fun host and everything. And so thank you for that.
Well, I'm not going to shy away from a compliment. Wow, I can't speak. A compliment. And we'll get you on another 4 times to compete with Ruben. We'll bring the fights to Ruben.
Yeah, there we go. There we go, Ruben. It's on.
And so on that note, I believe that is a wrap.
Yep. And thank you, everyone.